This thing that we're doing here, right? It is a connection to a divine understanding, right? That life is not an accident, right? That nothing emerges haphazardly. It's not a haphazard convocation of chemicals in motion. Ultimately, you always end up at the line in the sand, right? Words. Right? Which came first, thought or motion? Right? There's the line, the horizon of your ignorance, and you have to make an inference of understanding, right? So I choose to say that thought came first, that Platonic forms is the true philosophy. All things reside as idea. How does this relate to Quentin? What I'll say is that while attempting to read my book, which is somewhere, here it is, earlier, right? My lecture on Masonic symbolism. It's a really good book. That I felt his evil, 100%. He doesn't want me to be wise. Right? But it's all the same. Right? And then again, this is the shallowness of it all. Right? So if we say that thought precedes motion, then space is structured in a particular way. That the conscious field, right, which is the expression of giving, God's love, the divine light of deity, etc., exists in a perpetual state of rest, omnipresent in every cubic centimeter of space, equally distributed in terms of volumetric pressure. Right? Embedded within the divine light of God, is an infinite complex nesting of polyhedra. This is one example. Right? This is a compound of 40 tetrahedra, right? 20 pointing up, 20 pointing down. Right? And so, if you look, right, to this, right, here's an example. Right? That's a subdivision of 42. Right? That all these things are all nested inside of each other. Right? So perfect in their expression, right, that they dissolve into seeming non-existence. And when the divine light of God exerts its knowing upon that hologram, right, it is a quantum hologram of electric potential and probability, right? And when the divine light squeezes it, right, it exerts pressure, right, at the angle or angles, right, angel or angels, right, upon the subatomic structural scaffolding, right, and as it does that, it collapses, right, until it reaches the interior geometry of what's inside of here, right? It's called the vector equilibrium, which is actually up there on paper, but you can't see it. It's just on a frame, right? And so as soon as you hit that, right, it then collapses through the Platonic solids, right? Dodeca, cosoctahedra, cube, right? Tetrahedra, right? And through those five polyhedral arrangements, right, closest packing of spheres, right, we see a mirror for all of the molecular chemical structure of all of the elements on the periodic table, right? So, right, God from Ein Sof to Malkuth, right, it's from outside in, right, it's an exertion of pressure upon the hologram, right, and as it's collapsing towards center, right, it becomes pregnant with electric resistance, right, as friction grating against itself, right, until the friction becomes so great, right, the electric resistance becomes so high that it can no longer remain in inert space and erupts into incandescence, right, as matter, right, first photons of light, chemical elements, atmospheric strata, mineral, vegetable, animal, man, right, and so the specific angle, right, if we say within here, right, is the geometric lattice underpinning structure for all of manifested reality, right? And then we close this in a sphere, and I cast a circle around it. That's called a great circle, right? So any degree on that great circle can represent a pressure condition upon the quantum manifold, right? which is to say it can represent a vector of manifestation out of the abstract divine idealized form into a manifested measurable corpuscular shadow, right? And so that's, what is that, 360 opportunities, right, for each great circle, right? And so you have an infinite variety of great circles which can wrap around this form, right? My point being, right, that God the Father alone, right, manifests all of physical manifested reality, right, through the omniscience, the dignity of its thinking, right? So all instances of psychic phenomena, right, the things that people refer to as psychic, clairvoyant, telepathy, telepathic, telekinesis, psychokinesis, thaumaturgy, remote viewing, right, are the same things, right, that people refer to as magic, right, and sorcery in centuries past, right? So all instances of clairvoyance, all instances of magic, right, of telepathy, right, of remote viewing, of sorcery, of magic spells, right, is the mind of the adept, right, tapping into the non-locality, omnipresence of the divine abstract intellectual quality, right, which manifests all of reality through its thinking, through its exerting a pressure upon the quantum hologram, right? The highest expressions of said clairvoyance, right, of said expression of extrasensory perception sees the adept behaving like God, right? And so you can heal the sick, right? And you can see through other people's eyes, right? And far easier, right? Though far more evil, right? On the worst level of this, right? You can destroy people, right? So uplift your soul to God. See what's good in your life. Like, comment, subscribe, share. All the best. Have a good weekend. Stay cool.